LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I've picked out, I think it's 32 of the weekend's best clips for what should be an interesting show for you tonight. As usual, my clips come mostly from the Sunday morning news analysis shows on the Big Five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States. And I'll also have a few political comedy clips from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher last Friday. You can see the topics I'm covering listed down in the video description, and if you're watching this as a recorded show, you should see time indexes down there to skip to the topics that most interest you. Tonight's topics include, I think about half the clips for the show are on the two sides of the 2016 presidential campaign, believe it or not. About half the clips are on Hillary Clinton and her three most likely rivals, and about half those clips are on the Republican contenders. Apparently about 20 of them were in New Hampshire this week, so I'll have clips on that. I'll also have a bunch of clips on the political compromise reached on whether Congress will have to approve this nuclear deal with Iran, the so-called Corker-Cardin bill, and I'll have clips of both Senator Corker and Senator Cardin and a couple other senators discussing it. Then at the end I'll have a quick clip on cops and a quick clip on marijuana, but first I want to begin with the issue of money in politics and campaign finance reform that was in the news this week, not just because of the start of the 2016 presidential campaign a year and a half early, but because a mailman from Florida flew this gyrocopter onto the White House lawn to bring attention to the issue, though, as I'll show, the issue got almost no resulting coverage, which was something Bill Maher pointed out on his real-time program last Friday before he engaged in an actual discussion about campaign finance with Democratic strategist Neera Tanden and former American Idol singer Clay Aiken over in this clip.
Talk about money in politics. Let's all talk about money in politics. I mentioned it in the monologue. This guy who flew under the White House lawn with the gyro, it was like a bicycle with a propeller, right? And all I saw in the media was like, let's talk about the gyroscope or the gyrocopter, and let's talk about no security. And nobody talked about why he did it, which was to bring attention to a very important issue. Maybe the most important issue is that elections are bought and sold now by billionaires. This guy is a hero to me. I'm not going to make fun of him.
I agree.
And also, you know, again, the media covering bullshit this week barely mentioned that Hillary Clinton actually did make news when she said we should have a constitutional amendment to get money out of politics.
I mean, I think the big change in politics over the last couple of years has been the Citizens United decision, which, you know, in my view, wrongfully decided that money is speech, which is, you know, truthfully just crap. I mean, money is not the same as speech. And it's created this arms race to see who can win an election through their pocketbooks instead of through voice. And that's the system. And it's too bad it would take a constitutional amendment. What should really happen is the Supreme Court should change the decision it made. We went through years, decades without that decision in place. That's the decision that's the way in which the court has really perverted the democracy.
The only way you win is with money now. I mean, the person who raises the most money always wins. And I tried to run for these folks who couldn't give me $5. I mean, those are the people who politicians should be listening to.
Right.
But I had people pressuring me every day, spend 40 hours a week on the phone, calling people outside of your state, outside of your district, ask them for money. And you know what? If you never talk to the people in your district, that's okay. Just raise more money and run more ads, and that's bullshit.
Politicians are telemarketers now.
That's why
they spend all their time on the phone begging for money.
Now, I agree with what Clay Aiken said there, and Bill Maher also said at the end about politicians having to spend all their time raising money. But the solution to that is public financing of campaigns, as I've discussed many times before in my videos, not a constitutional amendment. And that stuff the Democratic strategist Neera Tanden said there about Citizens United was totally wrong. That wasn't the case in which the U.S. Supreme Court supposedly said money equals speech. That was a case way back in 1976, Buckley versus Vallejo. And what the Supreme Court actually said wasn't money equals speech, and I'm going to put this quote up for you, but this is what the Supreme Court said. Some forms of communication made possible by the giving and spending of money involve speech alone. I hope you can see that. Some involve conduct primarily, and some involve a combination of the two. Yet this court has never suggested that the dependence of a communication on the expenditure of money operates itself to introduce a non-speech element or to reduce the exacting scrutiny required by the First Amendment. And then to sort of clarify that, the court continues over in this next quote. Virtually every means of communicating ideas in today's mass society requires the expenditure of money. The distribution of the humblest handbill or leaflet entails printing, paper, and circulation costs. Speeches and rallies generally necessitate hiring a hall and publicizing the event. The electorate's increasing dependence on television, radio, and other mass media for news and information has made these expensive modes of communication indispensable instruments of effective political speech. So, who could really disagree with that? It didn't say money equals speech. What it said is that speech and expressive activities like leafleting, staging rallies, publicizing events, and that kind of thing doesn't lose its First Amendment protection just because it requires spending money. Can anyone actually disagree with that? Anyway, I do want to get to the issue of that gyrocopter, which, as Bill Maher predicted, was not covered as a campaign finance issue, but was covered as a security issue. And I'll show you one example. This is a report from ABC's Pierre Thomas on This Week with George Stephanopoulos this morning that barely mentioned campaign finance over in this clip.
This week, another stunning reminder that despite billions spent on homeland security after 9/11, the creative and simple can still beat the country's most complex defenses. A Florida man piloting what amounted to a flying lawnmower called a gyrocopter, thwarting every security system protecting the U.S. Capitol's restricted airspace. It took off from Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, flying low through Maryland, 80 miles straight into Washington, D.C., traveling just 45 miles per hour, only 150 feet above ground, zooming past the World War II memorial, past the Washington Monument, right onto the Capitol lawn.
I'm going to violate the no-fly zone, and I'm going to land on the Capitol Mall.
Doug Hughes, the Postal Service worker, put in handcuffs, telling authorities he just wanted to deliver a political statement about campaign finance. As the Homeland Security Secretary put it, he literally flew under the radar.
This is not good, people.
Defense systems designed to detect fast-moving planes and missiles, but seemingly unprepared for small, slow, and low-flying aircraft. Critics say, what if he'd been a terrorist with guns or bombs?
How does an individual in the airspace get that close?
In 2004, the 9/11 Commission concluded the U.S. government suffered from a failure of imagination in battling al-Qaeda after radicals used box cutters to turn planes into flying missiles.
The government failed to protect the American people.
Clearly, some lessons have been learned. The FBI and intelligence officials are now much more aggressive in trying to find radicals before they act. This week, authorities arresting a Columbus, Ohio man allegedly inspired by ISIS online and trained in Syria by al-Qaeda. His attorney claims he's innocent and that the government's case is weak. But prosecutors say a radical cleric directed Abdurrahman Sheikh Mohammed to return to the U.S. to carry out an act of terrorism. In just the last 3 months, authorities have arrested 22 Americans accused of attempting to support al-Qaeda or ISIS overseas. Imagination and creativity now required in a deadly game of chess between the U.S. and its adversaries. For This Week, Pierre Thomas, ABC News, Washington.
So you can see in that coverage of the guy on the gyrocopter, it started going into the whole Islamic extremism and terrorism angle with only one brief mention of campaign finance, and then they even followed it up with a question to the chair of the House Homeland Security Committee, Mike McCall, and you can see this doesn't mention campaign finance at all. It's all about the security breach. And at the end, the Republican member of Congress actually accuses the guy who flew the gyrocopter of literally going postal, which I think if there's a literal meaning of going postal, it's a figurative term, so I'm not even sure what the literal meaning is. But literally going postal. Going postal, that means like going crazy. So they're like not only not talking about his issue, but they're sort of inferring that he's kind of nuts over in this clip.
I want to turn to the gyrocopter and the mailman who made it on to the Capitol lawn. Do we have in place technology that should have detected that small helicopter?
You know, I met with the sergeant at arms after this event. I was actually on the Capitol grounds when this helicopter landed, and I think part of the problem is these small, ultralight aircraft are very difficult to detect, can fly under the radar, as this one did, or even the small UAV devices like the one we saw that was landed in the backyard of the White House. That is the real threat, and I think it exposed a vulnerability, quite frankly, that in this case, the guy was just going postal, literally. It exposes a vulnerability that the terrorist, I think, can exploit. I am meeting with officials on Capitol Hill to see what we can do to tighten up these security procedures.
And
so yeah, that all about security, and basically there was no other mention of campaign finance reform, at least in terms of the gyrocopter on ABC, except that brief mention in the Pierre Thomas report. But Fox News always going one better on any type of media bias, I guess. They reported on the whole gyrocopter incident, and not once in the entire program did they ever mention that campaign finance was his issue, even though they had the gyrocopter as the top story on Fox News Sunday, as you can see in this like 20-second intro to the program here.
A Florida man penetrates restricted airspace, landing his gyrocopter near the U.S. Capitol, raising new questions about security here in Washington.
This is not good, people.
It may provide an opportunity for law enforcement agencies, including the Secret Service, to review their procedures.
We'll discuss the latest in a growing list of security breaches with the chair of the House Oversight Committee, Jason Chaffetz. And our Sunday panel weighs in on who's watching the watchdogs.
So like you saw there, and they introed it a couple more times, never mentioning the campaign finance issue. They did mention the security issue a couple times, and one was a kind of funny question to Lindsey Graham, quoting Salon magazine, saying that Lindsey Graham had lost his mind over this incident because he said that they should have shot the guy down. And I'll show you that clip, even though there's no mention of campaign finance once again over here.
Senator, I want to start with the headline on a Salon.com website this week, which says Lindsey Graham loses his mind for saying the man who flew down the National Mall in a gyrocopter this week should have been either forced down or shot down. Are you serious about that?
Yeah. Deadly serious. I think our nation's at war with radical Islam. The primary goal of these groups is to attack our nation. Washington's a prime target. This many years after 9/11, with this many groups wanting to hurt us at home, I'm just astounded that somebody could do what he did. I'm glad he's not hurt, but that just shows you how far our defenses have fallen. And this president constantly minimizes the threats we face as a nation. I will not be part of that.
I should have guessed that somehow by the end there, Lindsey Graham would have brought it down to being President Obama's fault that gyrocopter landed on the lawn, or at least he's minimizing the threats, and the threat from postal workers wanting to protest too much money in politics, I guess, is, I don't know. That seemed kind of ridiculous to me. And then even more ridiculous when the Fox News Sunday program actually got to Representative Jason Chaffetz from the House Oversight Committee, as advertised in that intro. They asked him about the gyrocopter after doing a segue from the 20th anniversary of the Oklahoma City bombing, and they didn't like make it two different topics. They said it raised questions about the whole gyrocopter incident, as you can see over in this clip.
A look at Oklahoma City, where they're remembering the 168 people killed and hundreds more injured in the bombing of the federal building there 20 years ago today. This tragic anniversary comes as Washington is still reeling over a shocking security lapse here this week. Joining us now, the chairman of the House Oversight Committee, Jason Chaffetz. Congressman, let's go back to that astonishing video from this week, which we've been looking at repeatedly. of a postal worker flying down the National Mall, highly restricted Area 56, and landing on the of the U.S. Capitol. NORAD, FAA, the Secret Service, the Capitol Police all have jurisdiction. Who do you hold responsible for the security breach, sir?
Well, one of the problems is you have 32 federal agencies, or 32 law enforcement agencies, I should say, within Washington, D.C. with some degree of jurisdiction. And so you worry about the coordination and the communication, but certainly the Capitol Hill Police, the United States Secret Service, which were evidently notified well in advance. This person had foreshadowed that they were going to come in and do this. But then you need to have visibility. And so you look at NORAD and just the basic flight control coming out of Reagan about whether or not you can see what's coming towards the airport and towards the National Mall.
So yeah, once again, no mention of campaign finance. They're really just talking about the security issue from the gyrocopter, and that's the last clip I want to play on the security issue from the gyrocopter. But I do want to show a couple more on campaign finance reform. First, one more from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher. This is from his New Rule segment at the end, where he did his long ending new rule was on climate change and this thing he calls zombie lies, which are lies that have been, Republican lies about climate change in this case, that have been disproven, and yet they still continue to tell them. And I'm going to show this segment where he talks about some of his least favorite of those lies, and then he transitions it into being about campaign finance reform, as I'll talk about after you see that over here.
Oh, there are so many echo-zombie lies, like carbon is good for you, the climate is always changing, I just made a snowball, and of course, Al Gore has a big house. Trump card. But my favorite is the one that says, even though there may be a scientific consensus, consensuses have been wrong before. Ted Cruz says, just look at Galileo. Oh, Ted, I worked with Galileo. Galileo was a friend of mine. You, sir, are no Galileo. But as long as you want to look at Galileo, the consensus he disproved was that the sun orbits the Earth, which wasn't a scientific consensus. It was a Bible myth from caveman. He was the scientist in the... You know what? Why am I getting excited and bothering? This was never about facts to begin with. But what is new is that it's not even about pandering to voters anymore. Even half of Republicans now want this issue dealt with. Well, good luck, because the zombie lies aren't for the voters. They're for the donors who make their money killing the planet. The question is not why today's politicians suck more than ever, it's who they're sucking more than ever. The Koch brothers are in the oil business, and they're pledging almost $1 billion in this election. For that kind of money, Cruz and Bush and the rest of them will say anything. It's what their fellow prostitutes in the sex industry call the girlfriend experience. All right, that's...
Now, of course, that doesn't have to do with Citizens United. The Koch brothers giving all that money to the candidates that are promoting their, climate denial agenda, that isn't from Citizens United, because they're not giving Koch brothers money. They're giving their actual own personal money. It's these rich billionaires who can give their own money, and they can give it to these super PACs because of a DC Circuit Court of Appeals decision, Speech Now versus FEC. That's the one that said that rich individuals can give as much money as they want to these super PACs that then do these independent expenditure ads, and everyone knows which candidate they're associated with, and they're not really that independent. And that's part of the problem. Not Citizens United, which is letting corporations do their independent expenditures. And even though Bill Maher showed a bunch of corporate logos there, it's generally rich people who work for those companies or who are shareholders in those companies. They're not spending corporate money, they're spending their own money. And so they're like these, rich 1%er billionaires, not the corporations so much. It's definitely a problem, but it's not a Citizens United problem. That's, I guess, the point I'm trying to make after showing that clip. And then the next clip I want to show you is sort of a transitional clip between the topic of campaign finance reform and then getting to the topic of Hillary Clinton running for president for the first week of her campaign after announcing last Sunday. And this is a clip of one of her possible challengers, former senator and a former Navy man, Jim Webb. And he talks about whether he's running for president. And the first issue he brings up when talking about it is the money that he would have to raise. And so that's why it's kind of a transition from campaign finance to Hillary Clinton. And this is from, let me make sure I've got this right. It's from CNN's State of the Union this morning. Right, and Jim Webb is talking to the guest host of the week, Jim Sciutto, over here.
From a much different perspective. I think when you get the political commentators at a table, one of the first things they talk about is, can you raise $1 billion? And I think what the average person in our country is looking at is, can you lead? And how do you get to a position where you can connect your views in an environment where billions of dollars are coming in, particularly since Citizens United. So that's what we're looking at, and those are the evaluations we have to make.
Are you leaning towards running?
We had a good visit to Iowa. I'll be going back in about a week, and it's, as you know, it's a state with highly intelligent citizenry when it comes to politics. I have a cousin who lives in Cedar Rapids who told me he met 4 presidential candidates one day when he was out watering his yard. So they're, you know, and it's a good place to see whether the message can get.
There are 4 times that many on the Republican side, so it's conceivable.
So yeah, that was Jim Webb, who was one of the possible challengers to Hillary Clinton, talking about the possibility he may be running. Sounds quite possible from if you watch the entire interview. And of course, I have links down in the video description to the entire episode of each of these programs, I believe. I'm sure ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, or I'm not sure. It depends on where you are and what your cable provider is, I think, as to whether you can see the entire episode or not. But I think at least that clip should be available at the link down there. And I am going to show clips from the 2 other most likely challengers to Hillary Clinton, Senator Bernie Sanders and Governor Martin O'Malley. But before I get to those, I want to show some general summaries of how Hillary Clinton's campaign went in the first week. One from ABC and then one from NBC. This is ABC. The first one is from ABC, This Week with George Stephanopoulos. I think Martha Raddatz handed off to their reporter, Cecilia Vega, who's covering Hillary Clinton in Iowa, and then moving on to New Hampshire in this clip.
See, Cecilia Vega is on the Clinton beat for us. Good morning, Cecilia.
Martha, good morning to you. That's right. Next stop, New Hampshire. Her campaign is really pushing hard to make this not look like a done deal. Her new strategy, an accessible, humble Hillary Clinton, but will voters buy it?
Hi, how are you all?
Hi.
Corey, how are you?
This is Hillary Clinton 2.0.
I'll try both your chai and your Carmelo, and maybe a glass of water, too.
From coffee shops to Chipotle, a candidate launching her presidential bid with a road trip.
I want to know what I can do.
With one failed run for the White House in the rearview mirror, this time in Iowa, Clinton is trying something new. No helicopters or giant rallies.
And I'm in it to win it.
It's all about the Scooby van and one-on-one with everyday Iowans. Meetings that so far have been heavy on handshakes and light on policy. Today in Hillary land, humility is the buzzword.
Is this lessons learned from 07? I guess in some ways, you know, your whole life is lessons learned. So this is how she's decided she wants to, that she wants to do this.
But is it enough to win in this state where she came in a favorite 8 years ago, then lost to Barack Obama?
Nobody wants a coronation.
Democratic strategist Jeff Link says the party faithful expect a contest. And if one heats up, it is possible Clinton could be beat.
I think anything can happen in Iowa. If you really catch fire, it can make a big difference here.
No one has sparked a serious challenge yet. But even Clinton loyalists tell me they are hopeful it might happen.
But what does Hillary have to prove here?
I think she has to connect with ordinary Iowans. This is where the process starts. And she needs to visit with us, meet us in our homes and so on. And I think, convince us that she's the best candidate.
And her campaign is bracing for an Iowa challenger. It remains to be seen if that will happen. Clinton makes her first trip of this 2016 race to New Hampshire tomorrow, meeting with small business owners, these small groups of voters. No rallies this time. Martha, right now it is all about these one-on-one meetings with voters.
So that was sort of a good general report, I thought, from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, their reporter Cecilia Vega. But I want to show you an additional report, this one from NBC's Meet the Press. Chuck Todd did a report that seemed, I don't know, to me at least seemed more biased against the Clintons. It really focused on how the irony of the Clintons that ran last time as, you know, being young and new are now having to run against people who are using that exact same tactic against them. And I'll talk about that a little more if you see it here.
Hillary Clinton spent her first official week of campaigning meeting ordinary people, or at least trying to leave the impression that she was meeting ordinary people. But one hurdle she's going to have to clear is to avoid being seen as the candidate of yesterday. Generationally, it's a huge challenge, as Marco Rubio made clear earlier this week during his announcement. And ironically for the Clintons, this is especially difficult, given that they are used to being on the other side of this generational campaign message.
I believe we need a new kind of leadership. Leadership not mired in the politics of the past. Leadership not tied to the old ideologies.
From the moment he introduced himself as a presidential candidate back in 1991, Bill Clinton exploited a generational line of attack.
We have the courage to change. The choice is as old as America. A choice between more of the same and fundamental change. The American people have voted to make a new beginning.
The argument? New ideas should trump experience, and a candidate of the past could not win the future.
Where there is no vision, America will perish. What is the vision of our new covenant?
Bill Clinton ran that campaign against two members of the GI generation in 1992 and 1996. Showing off his young family and running mate. Disarming critics by facing awkward questions on the hip MTV.
If you had to do over again, would you inhale?
And famously playing the sax on late night. It's a campaign the Bill Clinton of 2 decades ago would be running against Hillary Clinton now.
With all respect, we do not need to build a bridge to the past. We need to build a bridge to the future.
Republican opponents are already borrowing the Bill Clinton playbook, exploiting the generation gap.
Just yesterday, a leader from yesterday began a campaign for president by promising to take us back to yesterday.
I mean, I think about Hillary Clinton. I could run 20 years from now for president and still be about the same age as the former Secretary of State is right now.
Hillary Clinton's big hope, that her policy positions and perhaps her gender will trump biography, particularly with young people.
Is it just me, or did that seem kind of biased against Hillary Clinton? I mean, not that I'm the biggest Hillary Clinton fan, but if you compare what you saw there from NBC's Chuck Todd to what was on the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos program, it seemed much more biased. You know, they're old now. They used to be young. Now they're old. Seemed to be the theme of that. And you saw that clip from Marco Rubio there at the end. Or near the end, where he talked about how Hillary was yesterday. I think at one point he even said, yesterday is over, which is, I think that's a truism. And as far as Hillary Clinton being yesterday, according to Marco Rubio, that was a question that Martha Raddatz asked Senator Claire McCaskill on the program, and she pretty much slammed Marco Rubio, although on his immigration flip-flop, really. But I'll talk about that a little more if you see that over here.
Marco Rubio, we were talking about the Republicans, of course, who announced his candidacy this week, frames it as a generational choice. Let's listen.
Now, just yesterday, a leader from yesterday began a campaign for president by promising to take us back to yesterday.
Your reaction to that, Senator?
Listen, if you look at Marco Rubio's record, he took a principled, courageous stand on immigration reform, and we passed a comprehensive bill in the Senate. And then the minute his party's base started chewing on him about it, the minute Rush Limbaugh criticized him, he folded like a cheap shotgun. That's old politics. That's not what we need right now. That is the stalest trick in the book. That is shirking on your principles because of the political necessities of your party. So I don't think that he necessarily represents some generational change. It sounds like to me old-style politics.
And I'll actually have more on Marco Rubio's flip-flop, because I have a couple clips of Marco Rubio, on his immigration flip-flop when I get to the Republicans, since Marco Rubio declared his candidacy this last week on the GOP side. But I do want to finish up with some more clips of the potential challengers to Hillary Clinton. First, Senator Bernie Sanders, the Democratic socialist from Vermont, who is an independent but would run as a Democrat, I guess. He was over on Fox News Sunday with Chris Wallace, and Chris Wallace tried really hard to get him to attack Hillary Clinton, starting with Hillary Clinton's rhetoric in her first week as a candidate, talking about how the deck is stacked in favor of the top 1%. And you can see Chris Wallace tried to get Bernie Sanders to say he had doubts about whether Hillary Clinton could really carry that message, after showing an interesting poll about how Bernie Sanders, he is way behind Hillary Clinton, but is actually ahead among the people most likely to challenge Hillary Clinton over in this clip.
Is also weighing a presidential run in 2016. Independent Senator Bernie Sanders is considering taking on Hillary Clinton, and the polls have both good news and bad news for him. In the latest average of national polls, he's far behind Clinton, but he runs ahead of the two other likely candidates, Martin O'Malley and Jim Webb. Senator Sanders, welcome to Fox News Sunday.
Good to be with you.
Senator, you say that you are considering running against Hillary Clinton, among other reasons, because you doubt whether or not she's willing to take on the billionaires in America. Here's what she said during a rollout in Iowa this week.
There's something wrong when hedge fund managers pay lower tax rates than nurses or the truckers that I saw on I-80 as I was driving here over the last 2 days.
Senator, don't you believe her?
Well, she's absolutely right, but it's not a question of running against Hillary Clinton or taking on Hillary Clinton. What we are seeing, Chris, right now is that for 40 years, the American middle class has been disappearing. Millions of people are working longer hours for low wages despite a huge increase in technology and productivity. And what we have seen during that period is a massive transfer of trillions of dollars from the middle class to the top 0.1% in America. Massive wealth and income inequality, where you have 99% of all new income today going to the top 1%, and the top 0.1% in America owning almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%.
If I may, you told Bloomberg that you had serious doubts about whether she was willing to take on the billionaire class. What are those doubts?
Well, that's fair. Yeah, but my point is, it's not just Hillary Clinton.
Well, I'm asking you about Hillary Clinton, though, sir.
Well, the answer is, if I can, please. The answer is that I think that is the fight that we have to wage if we're going to save the middle class. And I do have doubts about whether Hillary Clinton or whether any Republican candidate out there is prepared to take on the big money interests who control so much of our economy, and as a result of Citizens United, our political process as well.
Yeah. So I guess they did briefly mention Citizens United on Fox News Sunday, but and campaign finance reform, but it was not in relation to the gyrocopter, and it was by Senator Bernie Sanders there. And I want to show one additional clip from Senator Bernie Sanders. Here he actually he talks about what is necessary to get more equity between the top 1% and everyone else, and he actually mentions the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, this trade agreement that was in the news this last week. And then Chris Wallace follows up on that, which I'll discuss after you see that clip over here.
What we need to do, Chris, is to understand that in America, if we're going to be successful in taking on the billionaire class, we need a strong national grassroots movement. And what the Secretary will have to convince the American people is, in fact, based on her past record and her views today, that she is going to break up the major banks on Wall Street, that she is going to ask the wealthiest people in this country to start paying their fair share of taxes, that she's going to end the abomination of major corporations making billions of dollars, stashing their money in the Cayman Islands, and not paying a nickel in federal income tax. That, in fact, she is prepared to deal with our disastrous trade policies. The TPP.
Sir, let me ask you about the trade policy, because back when she was Secretary of State, Clinton said she favored a trade deal with our 11 Pacific partners and fast-track authority to make that happen. That's something Congress is now considering. Now Secretary Clinton says she wants to wait and see. Is that an issue for you vis-a-vis Secretary Clinton?
Oh, Chris, you're looking at a guy who was in the House and in the Senate, voted against all of these terrible trade agreements, NAFTA, CAFTA, permanent normal trade relations with China. As I'm sure you'll remember, all of the big money interest, and by the way, Republicans and Democrats, or they say, oh, well, we're going to create all of these jobs by having a trade agreement with China. Well, the answer is they were wrong, wrong, wrong. Over the years, we have lost millions of decent-paying jobs. These trade agreements have forced wages down in America, so the average worker in America today is working longer hours for lower wages.
So is that a litmus test for you, sir?
I don't have to wait and see.
Is that
Chris,
a litmus
I'm against
test?
This trade,
is that a litmus test for you to see whether or not Clinton is going to come out against the TPP?
Well, I know where my view is. I hope very much the Secretary comes out against it. I think we do not need to send more jobs to low-wage countries. I think corporate America has got to start investing in this country and create decent-paying jobs here.
So I thought that was kind of an interesting look at what a Senator Bernie Sanders run for president might look like. And I don't know what my viewers think of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I actually had someone post on my LiberalViewer Facebook page asking if I would talk about that on the program this Sunday. The thing is, there is no deal. What was in the news this last week was what they call fast-track authority, whether the Congress can make amendments to the deal or whether they can just vote it up or down as a trade treaty. And so to find out whether it's actually really bad, you'd have to see what the final deal is. I mean, in principle, I am someone who's in favor of free trade. I think that it does overall benefit the economy and overall benefit workers, And you know what happened before World War I, or between World War I and World War II. I mean, the Great Depression was the result of this protectionist spiral of tariffs and reparations that Germany owed, and all sorts of economic mistakes. And I think when countries trade together, that's one of the reasons I'm in favor of immigration reform, is because I think borders should actually be open to goods, capital, and labor. Though I think that when people have jobs and become part of our society, they should also get a path to citizenship. They shouldn't just be a commodity, a labor commodity. But anyway, it's also true that those type of trade agreements need to have standards, labor standards and environmental standards, so that the people we're trading with don't get to make their products without having to uphold the same standards that we uphold in the United States. That's unfair trade. It's not free trade. So it's not like any agreement would necessarily be a good agreement just because in principle I am in favor of free trade. But anyway, since I got a request to talk a little bit about it, I wanted to say that much anyway. And now I want to show a couple clips from the last of the three likely challengers to Hillary Clinton. This is former Maryland Governor Martin O'Malley, and he talks about, in this next clip, he talks about why, he actually talks about Wall Street and trade agreements as a reason why there may need to be challengers to Hillary Clinton. When Bob Schieffer asks him, does Hillary Clinton need challengers? Over here.
Do you think that
having more candidates is good for the Democratic Party? I mean, I sit here
like
and
more
look
than
at
one?
this. Here's a party that won the last two presidential elections, and yet it comes down to there seems to be this one candidate. Shouldn't there be more people out there? Shouldn't the party have? Why is there nobody but you? And I mean, I don't mean this in a deprecating way toward you, but you seem to be the lone guy who's even thinking about challenging her right now.
Yeah, I'm not sure why that is, but I think it would be an extreme poverty indeed if there weren't more than one person willing to compete for the presidential nomination of the Democratic Party. Look, this is the way I think it's supposed to work. I believe that if you have the executive experience, the ideas that can serve our nation well, and the ability to govern, you should offer your candidacy and then let the people decide. If we do that, then we can be the party that leads our country into the future. But we won't do it unless we offer ideas for the future and break with things like bad trade deals, the systematic deregulation of Wall Street that many Democrats were complicit in and helped get us into this mess.
Governor, I want to thank you. I hope you'll come back when you tell us what.
So, as you can see from Bob Schieffer thanking Martin O'Malley there at the end, that was the final clip from the interview. But I want to skip back to an earlier clip in that interview where he talks about, why he's running for president. Bob Schieffer sort of tries to bait him into attacking Hillary Clinton, and he says that he doesn't want to run against, he wants to run for, and talks a little bit about what he's running for over in this clip.
Because I believe that our country faces big challenges, and I know that leadership's important if we're going to turn these challenges into opportunities. I have 15 years of executive experience as a big city mayor and as a governor, bringing people together to get things done, and I believe that I have the ideas that will help our country move forward to a time when our economy is actually working for all of us again instead of wages declining.
Well, are you going to run against her, or are you going to run against Republicans? I mean, all the Republicans, it's pretty clear they're running against Hillary Clinton. Do you join in that group, or do you have a different story to tell?
Yeah, I think that the best campaigns are not campaigns that are against, but campaigns that are for. In other words, look, our country's doing better than we were 4 years ago. We're creating jobs again. But the vast majority of us are working harder and falling behind. Wages are declining in the United States of America. So I believe what we need to do in order to bring people together is to talk about the ideas, especially if we're going to be the party that actually leads America into the future.
Let me just say.
So that's the last clip on the potential challengers to Hillary Clinton. I don't know which one seemed like the one who would be best to, if not actually challenge Hillary Clinton, at least move her a little more to the left on issues like Wall Street and foreign policy. Jim Webb, I think, is not going to move Hillary Clinton to the left on foreign policy, but Bernie Sanders and Martin O'Malley both sound like they want to move her to the left on Wall Street and trade deals, and I guess that's something. The last clip I want to show on the topic of Hillary Clinton's run for president, this actually wasn't supposed to be a political thing. It was this segment over on NBC's Meet the Press. I do have that right. Yeah, no, I'm sorry. It was ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. The reporter, Jonathan Karl, he's like White House correspondent for ABC. He was talking to staff members, people who serve on the White House staff, because of this new book that talks about the White House staff. And he came up with this weird fact about the Clinton administration that I'd never heard from former White House usher Skip Allen over in this clip.
Family can take some time to get used to the staff they inherit. The transition for the Clintons was particularly rough. In the book, Allen calls Bill and Hillary, quote, about the most paranoid people I'd ever seen in my life.
They've been 12 years of Republicans, and all of a sudden this Democrat comes in, and I'm sure that if you were in their position, you would have felt the same way.
Long before the controversy over Hillary Clinton's private email server, the Clintons were apparently worried about White House operators listening in on their telephone calls.
They came in and decided that that wasn't the kind of situation that they would be comfortable with. And so they had the whole White House rewired for telephones.
Reworked so nobody could listen in.
I'm not sure if that's exactly the point, but they couldn't.
While many
Now, to me, I think stories like that are more harmful to Hillary Clinton, or more dangerous to Hillary Clinton's candidacy for the president than Martin O'Malley, Bernie Sanders, or Jim Webb. But you can let me know what you think down in the comment section. I want to move on to the other half of the 2016 presidential campaign, which seems to be one of the I'm telling you, having watched all the Sunday morning news analysis shows, that was the main topic of the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the corporate media this morning. And so the next, I think about 8 clips are going to be on the Republican side of the race. First, I'm going to show you 2 different summaries of what happened on the Republican side. First, Chuck Todd on NBC, then I'll give you Carl Cameron from Fox News Sunday. Here's Chuck Todd on NBC's Meet the Press talking about the 19 presidential candidates on the Republican side in New Hampshire. That's the number he gave. I saw from another source 21, but he says 19 for 19 months before the presidential election, 19 candidates in this clip.
To the presidential race and our focus this morning, there are 19 months to go until Election Day. And ready for this? 19 Republican candidates or potential candidates spent the weekend in New Hampshire. And they apparently had 2 goals. One was to impress Republican primary voters, and the other, bash Hillary Clinton. Her announcement last week was, of course, no surprise, and neither was the fact that the Republican hopefuls saw a bigger target in Hillary Clinton than they did in President Obama anymore. In fact, here's a sample.
As I was coming up, I was a little bit startled because I could have sworn I saw Hillary's Scooby-Doo van outside.
Hillary Clinton couldn't be here today because we didn't ask her.
And it is absolutely critical that we beat Hillary Clinton come 2016.
I doubt the presumptive nominee for the other party's ever been to Kohl's before, let alone shopped in the last 18 or 20 years.
For her part, Hillary.
So, and then Chuck Todd went into the Hillary Clinton clip that, or campaign clip that I already showed you, but I thought that was an okay sampling of the Republican candidates. But as I've said in some of my videos in the past, one reason I like to watch Fox News sometimes is because even though it is so dishonest in so many ways and such a mouthpiece of Republican propaganda, one thing it does cover well is what's going on in the Republican Party, because it has really, really good context in the Republican Party. It does have its own little spin. It's more towards the corporatist side of the Republican Party, although it does occasionally, I mean, I think of all the, I guess there are 4 wings of the Republican Party, it seems at this point. There's the establishment wing, there's the Tea Party wing, there's the Libertarian wing, and there's the Christian evangelical wing. And it's closest to the establishment, which is the more corporatist, Wall Street wing of the Republican Party. But I think they at least cover all parts of the Republican Party, and they have contacts in all parts of the Republican Party. So here is a much more detailed report from Fox News reporter Carl Cameron on Fox News Sunday this morning in this clip.
Thanks, Chris. 21 potential White House hopefuls took the stage in the 2-day First in the Nation summit. This is a wide open race, and it was a huge roster. In fact, the biggest ever for New Hampshire, and every one of the leading candidates came with something to accomplish. For Florida Governor Jeb Bush, it was dealing with his biggest problem, trying to reassure conservatives that he's one of them.
A lot of us are not looking for a Republican in name only. I don't want a coronation on our side by any stretch of the imagination.
I don't see any coronation coming my way, trust me.
Bush cast himself in New Hampshire as middle of the GOP road.
I would match my record with anybody that's thinking about running, or any governor that during the last 20 years.
Florida Senator Marco Rubio, who called Bush his mentor, made a break at the summit. Bush supports Common Core education standards. Rubio calls them big government usurping local education control.
I don't care what anybody tells you. Those standards will eventually be used to force on states policies the federal government wants, or you won't get federal money.
Chris Christie proposed raising the eligibility age for Medicare and Social Security this week, casting himself as a truth teller.
You know, some people say I'm too blunt and I'm too direct and too straightforward. I think we could use a little bit of that in Washington, D.C.
Kentucky Senator Rand Paul blasted the entire GOP field for criticizing Obama-Clinton foreign policy when he says they all take similar positions.
The other Republicans will criticize the president and Hillary Clinton for their foreign policy, but they would have just done the same thing just 10 times over.
Paul would do much less, yet in an interview with Fox News said he's in the middle of the GOP road on foreign policy.
You know, I think as people find out about my foreign policy, what they're going to find out is that I'm right in the mainstream of the Republican Party. I believe the #1 priority of the federal government is national defense.
Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker closed the summit with its keynote speech.
Tea Party to establishment, from social conservative libertarian, we would all, because what people want more than anything is they don't just want a fighter, they want someone who fights and wins.
Former Florida Governor Jeb Bush got a cordial reception, but it wasn't exactly raucous. Lindsey Graham, by far and away, came across as the most at ease and got points for the most jokes. Scott Walker did well, and Chris Christie, who needed a good performance, seems to be making a little bit of headway in New Hampshire. Chris?
So I actually like that report because, like I said, it was much more detailed. You notice there Scott Walker talked about the 4 wings of the Republican Party that I mentioned, which I didn't make those up. There was some other pundit in a clip I don't think I selected who also talked about the 4. Oh, it was Matthew Dowd on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, a former George W. Bush strategist. He also mentioned those 4 wings of the Republican Party. So I didn't make that up. That's something that you could see both in that Scott Walker clip and from other pundits. But I want to show some clips on Marco Rubio because he was the latest Republican to formally announce he's running for president. And I want to start with a clip from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, where he kind of made fun of Marco Rubio in a couple different ways, ending with his claim to be new ideas for a new century, but not really having the new ideas from his monologue over here.
So many new candidates to get to, ladies and gentlemen. Like every week now, another week, another candidate. This week, everybody ready for Marco Rubio of Florida? Oh my God. Yeah, they're all saying, you know, he's fresh, he's new. I'll say, looks like he could be Hillary Clinton's pool boy, this guy. Well, you know, everybody's got to have a shtick, you know, everybody's got to have a thing. And his thing is, I'm young. I'm young, I'm new, I'm fresh, I'm boyish. Yeah, when Ted Cruz reads Green Eggs and Ham, he listens. He's young. Now, the other day, I swear to God, he proclaimed, yesterday's over. It's fucking deep, man, okay? You got my vote. No, his slogan is a new American century, but he's against abortion in all situations, against gay marriage, against immigration reform, against legalizing pot, against clean energy development. It sounds a lot like the old century to me. You know what?
And that's definitely true. I don't see a lot of really new ideas from Marco Rubio, though from what I understand, he's a really good politician, and he has a command of the issues, and he's a good speaker, so he may end up being one of the top tier candidates in the 2016 campaign. And I think, I can't remember, some other one of the other candidates, was it Lindsey Graham? Someone was saying that he thought that Marco Rubio would be president, just not in 2016. I can't remember. I wish I could tell you who that was, but I want to show you a couple clips of Senator Marco Rubio himself over on CBS's Face the Nation. He talked to Bob Schieffer. And first, as promised when I showed Claire McCaskill really reaming him for his flip-flop on comprehensive immigration reform, I want to show how he answered that question from Bob Schieffer. You know, Marco Rubio was one of the senators who came up with this comprehensive immigration reform bill that spent all this, like, way too much money on border security, but had this long, arduous path to citizenship that gave away that the 11 million or however many undocumented immigrants in the United States could actually get to citizenship. Well, after that didn't get passed by the House, he took a big political hit in terms of his popularity with the Republican base. He's totally backed away from that, and you can see the latest iteration of his backing away from that, talking to Bob Schieffer this morning here.
Let's talk about immigration. Mm-hmm. You're Hispanic.
You have a wonderful life story. You were part of that bipartisan group that put together an immigration reform bill. You voted for it, and then when you got a lot of heat from people in your own party, you walked away from it.
Well, that's not an accurate assessment. What I'm saying to people is we can't do it in a massive piece of legislation. And I know, because I tried. We understand that we have to deal with 12 million human beings that are in this country that have been here for longer than a decade. We know we have to deal with this. We are not prepared to deal with it until first you can prove to us this will never happen again.
Well, if you became president, would you sign the bill that you put together into law?
Well, that's a hypothetical that will never happen. What I would do if I was president, the first thing I would do is I would ask Congress to pass a very specific bill that puts in place E-Verify, an entry-exit tracking system to prevent visa overstays, and improve security on the border. Once we achieve that, step two would be we would modernize our legal immigration system, less family-based, more merit-based. And then the third step would be to pass a bill that goes to the 10 million people that are here, or 12 million that are here illegally. If they've been here for longer than a decade, they have to pass a background check, they have to learn English, they have to pay taxes, they have to pay a fine, and they would get a work permit. And after a substantial period of time in that status, assuming they haven't violated any of the conditions of that status, they would be allowed to apply for legal residency, just like anybody else would, not a special process. And after you're a legal resident, after a number of years, by law, you're allowed to apply for citizenship. It's a long process, it's a reasonable process, it's a fair process, but it has to happen in that order, and it begins with serious enforcement measures.
So, I don't know. I'm not sure I buy the flip-flop as a learning experience about what's possible in Washington. It seems like there was a huge amount of border security in the bill that he originally supported, and claiming that that has to come first now. I don't know. You can let me know what you think. But I want to show an additional clip of Senator Marco Rubio where he shows that he's way on the right in terms of the issue of same-sex marriage. That's kind of a difficult place for the Republicans in the race. They're kind of caught behind the curve on where public opinion has gone on same-sex marriage in the last few years. And I'm actually going to show a clip from CNN's State of the Union on that in just a minute. But here's how Marco Rubio defines his position, and he's, in favor of one man, one woman being the definition of marriage, and that the one thing that seems to changed, even though he's on the very right side of even the Republican Party on this, he still doesn't call it a lifestyle, and he doesn't call it a choice. He actually says at the end he doesn't think that sexual orientation is a choice. So I guess that's some movement on the right side of the Republican Party, I guess, over in this clip.
Talk a little bit about social issues. You have said you're against gay marriage. Do you think that homosexuality is a choice?
Well, first, it's not that I'm against gay marriage. I believe the definition of the institution of marriage should be between one man and one woman. States have always regulated marriage, and if a state wants to have a different definition, you should petition the state legislature and have a political debate. I don't think courts should be making that decision, and I don't believe same-sex marriage is a constitutional right. I also don't believe that your sexual preferences are a choice for the vast and enormous majority of people. In fact, the bottom line is that I believe that sexual preference is something that people are born with.
Senator, we thank you.
Thank you.
So, like I said, at least he doesn't say it's a choice, but he also says that he doesn't think that same-sex marriage should be a constitutional right, and the right to marry is a fundamental constitutional right under Supreme Court law going back many, many years. And it looks like the Supreme Court is poised to say that the fundamental right to marriage can't be denied to same-sex couples, or it would be a denial of equal protection under the 14th Amendment, that has the Equal Protection Clause. And so maybe what Marco Rubio is trying to do there is set up a campaign issue where he's going to run against the Supreme Court decision. I guess nobody knows for sure what they're going to decide, but they're most likely going to say that it is a constitutional right. And I want to show this clip from CNN State of the Union. It's Jim Sciutto talking to reporter Sarah Murray, who actually had an interview with Ohio Governor John Kasich at least saying he would go to a same-sex wedding after he talked to his wife about it, apparently, over in this clip.
Back with Peter Baker and Sarah Murray. Sarah, one question that seems to have gotten all the Republican White House hopefuls is same-sex marriage, and in particular, would you go to a wedding or a same-sex marriage event? You were able to ask the Ohio Governor John Kasich about this in South Carolina. Let's listen to his answer.
I don't go to a lot of weddings. I go to weddings of people that I'm close to. And in fact, I have a friend who's gay who asked me if I would go to his wedding. And I said, well, let me think about it. And I went home and I said to my wife, you know, my friend's getting married. What do you think? You want to go? She goes, oh, I'm absolutely going. I called him today and said, hey, just let me know what time it is.
So Governor Kasich's going to go. We saw Scott Walker, Wisconsin governor, said he would go to a reception. Marco Rubio said he would go. How are they threading this needle here?
You know, I think this is a good sign of who Governor Kasich is as he's running, but also some of these other Republicans saying, look, I can have my positions and I don't have to go around pushing them on other people necessarily. I can still respect my friends and love my friends and support my friends, even though they know how I feel on this issue. And I think that Governor Kasich, Marco Rubio, and I would probably put Jeb Bush in this camp too, fall in this group of Republicans who are hoping that the court will just take care of this for them this summer, and they won't have to deal with it.
Is that
So, yeah, I think that's probably what's going to happen. Like I said, you can't know for sure what the Supreme Court's going to decide, but there's the most likely decision is that they're going to say there is a constitutional right, or that same-sex couples can't be denied marriage equality under the 14th Amendment, like I said. And that's probably what most Republican candidates are hoping, and it sounds like Marco Rubio may even make it into a campaign issue based on the clip I showed before that. I want to show one more clip. This is from another potential Republican candidate, Senator Lindsey Graham. You know, I should have picked an additional clip that I decided not to select because I already had over 30 of Lindsey Graham talking about how he was on Fox News Sunday, and Chris Wallace almost seemed to ask him if he was gay, but if he asked him why he never got married, or if the fact that both his parents died when he was a young adult and he had to raise his 13-year-old sister, if that was why he never got married. It was almost like an allusion to these rumors that Lindsey Graham is gay, although you know, I don't want to question anyone's sexual orientation or make that an issue, but I didn't choose that clip. But I did decide to show this one clip where Chris Wallace asked Lindsey Graham if he was too moderate for the Republican Party. You know, I've shown a lot of clips of him being really hawkish and extreme on foreign policy, but in his domestic policy issues, he's much more moderate, as Chris Wallace pointed out in the question. And then you can see Lindsey Graham basically defending his own extremism over in this clip.
Here's why some people are skeptical, and let's put some issues on the screen. You believe that climate change is real and the federal government must address it. You're open to raising taxes as part of a grand bargain. You support comprehensive immigration reform. In your home state of South Carolina, you are at this point running fourth behind Walker, Bush, and Cruz, and 55% of those polled in your home state say they would not consider voting for you for president. Are you too moderate? Are you too far in the center on non-defense issues to win the Republican nomination?
Not at all. I believe climate change is real, but I reject the cap and trade solution of Al Gore. He's made it a religion. I think it's a problem. I'd like to clean up the air and the water, become more energy independent, create jobs. I'm for offshore drilling. I'm for finding oil and gas that we own. I'm for coal. I'm for clean coal. I'm for natural gas, but I'd like a lower carbon economy over time, clean up the air, and create jobs in the process. In
Raising
terms
taxes
of
as part of
reform,
a grand bargain?
I'm for Simpson-Bowles. It doesn't raise taxes. It closes loopholes and takes the money that we would give to a few people and put it on the debt. We're $18 trillion in debt. 80 million baby boomers are going to retire in the next 20 to 30 years. We're going to wipe out Social Security and Medicare. We're going to have to adjust the age of retirement for younger people. People in my income level are going to have their benefits means tested. Democrats are going to want a simpler tax code, so I'm for eliminating deductions and taking some of the money to buy down rates and put it on the debt. To me, that's not raising taxes, that's solving a problem.
So, I don't know, you can let me know what you think about Senator Lindsey Graham and whether he did a good job defending himself as not being too moderate. No, he really is extreme on social issues. I don't know, it's kind of like a weird, backwards, bizarro world on Fox News where you have to like defend yourself for saying climate change is real. And anyway, I thought that was amusing, so I wanted to show you that last clip on the Republican field because it also sounded like in other clips I didn't show from Senator Lindsey Graham that he's almost definitely going to run for president, at least for the through the South Carolina primary, which is where he's from, of course. And I want to switch to the next topic now. So I covered the last couple weeks this nuclear deal with Iran and various European powers and China, where there's going to be this cap put on the Iranian nuclear program, and there are a lot of critics in the United States Congress. And anyway, there was this political compromise reached this week on whether Congress will actually have to approve the nuclear deal like a treaty, or whether it's just up to the president, like a political agreement, I guess, an executive agreement. And there's this so-called Corker-Cardin bill, and I actually have a couple clips from both Senator Corker and from Senator Cardin, who are both on CNN State of the Union talking to guest host of the week, Jim Sciutto. But first I want to show how Jim Sciutto introduced the issue and the Corker-Cardin bill that passed the Foreign Relations Committee over in this clip.
Republicans and Democrats in Congress have been demanding a say on the details in the Iran nuclear deal, and now they're going to get it. The Senate is set to pass a bill that gives Congress oversight of any final agreement. President Obama, who fought congressional involvement aggressively for months, now says he will support the measure. Fact is, with a veto-proof majority in the Senate, he likely had little choice. Joining me now,
So that was the introduction from Jim Sciutto on CNN State of the Union, and then he asked a couple questions about whether the Senate, the senators would insist on sanctions being lifted gradually, waiting for Iran to make good on its part of the deal. Because last Friday, President Obama had this press conference. It was I actually watched the entire President Obama press conference. It was this joint press conference with the Italian Prime Minister. And when the subject of the Iran deal came up, he said that he wouldn't commit to gradual release of sanctions. He might lift them right away. And that was an issue that Jim Sciutto raised with Bob Corker, the Republican senator from Tennessee, who's the co-sponsor of this Corker-Cardin bill, as you can see over in this clip.
With you, and thanks very much for taking the time this Sunday morning. In his press conference on Friday, the president, we were listening very closely, at a minimum, did not give an explicit commitment to the phased removal of sanctions on Iran, and this had been, to this point, a commitment from the president. He used the language lessened, but wouldn't talk about it being phased in. Is the president, in your view, capitulating to Iran on this issue?
Well, Jim, it's hard to know. One of the things that people may not know is that 4 times over the course of the last, since 2010, Congress has put in sanctions. We put them in place. But with that, we gave the president what's called a national security waiver. And so today, unilaterally, he has the ability to negotiate any deal that he wishes and go straight to the UN Security Council to have it implemented. What Senator Cardin, myself, and so many others have said is that we want to understand, Jim, whether what he just said is the way that it is or not. So before before he's able to lift the sanctions that we put in place, we've passed a piece of legislation out of the committee and hopefully across the floor into the House. We've passed a piece of legislation that allows us first to see all of those details, to stop the president from just lifting those sanctions without us having time to go through them, to give us the opportunity.
So that's a really important point that Senator Bob Corker made there that I have heard skipped over by a lot of the coverage, and especially by a lot of Republicans who say President Obama is overstepping his authority by not coming to Congress with this deal. Well, the sanctions that Congress passed against Iran specifically gave President Obama, or gave the president, the authority to get rid of the sanctions when he deemed it in the interest of U.S. national security. So it's definitely not true that President Obama oversteps his authority by lifting those sanctions, because that's authority the Congress actually gave him. But I also want to show a follow-up question that Jim Sciutto asked about whether the way the sanctions are lifted would be a part of the deal, or whether that was a necessary part of the deal. Let me make sure I click on the correct clip here. That's oh, and I also wanted to point out that I think that Jim Sciutto kind of biased this question in favor of the Republican position and against President Obama's position by saying that the gradual lifting of sanctions was really necessary to keep Iran honest. I mean, that may or may not be true, but it seems like it's not really fair to put that as the premise of the question over here.
The opportunity.
Are you saying that you would stop him from lifting those sanctions if it was not phased in over time? And this is a key issue for our viewers, because the issue here is if they're not phased in, then in effect the U.S. loses its leverage with Iran to keep them honest on honoring the deal.
Well, Jim, again, unless we have this piece of legislation that becomes law, there is no ability to do that. And there's no ability even for Congress to understand what the real arrangement is. As you know, at present, right now, the leadership in Iran is telling their citizens one thing, our president and others are telling us another. The only way we'll ever know what are the details, understand what is in the classified annexes, is for us to pass these pieces of legislation that are before us, because otherwise we may never know until way after the fact exactly what the agreement is. So look, I think it's very important, yes, that the sanctions be phased, so that we see how Iran is behaving and that whether they're actually living up to the arrangement, that we're building trust. But no, to alleviate those on the front end obviously just gives them immediately more money to conduct terrorist acts throughout the Middle East and to continue the hegemony that they've been involved in for the last several years.
So let me ask you.
So yeah, that's Senator Bob Corker, chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, saying that he definitely thinks that the sanctions need to be lifted gradually, and I'm going to show something even stronger from another Republican senator in a minute. But first I want to show the other named senator on the bill. This is Senator Ben Cardin, who replaced Senator Bob Menendez from New Jersey, who got indicted and is still in the Senate but stepped down as the ranking member on the Foreign Relations Committee. So Ben Cardin took his place, and the first question he answered from CNN guest host Jim Sciutto on State of the Union was on the issue of whether he was undermining his own president's authority by co-sponsoring this bill that gave Congress some oversight over when sanctions are lifted, and that's over in, let's see, this clip.
Let's turn back to Iran now. This is something, this was an interesting, it was good bipartisanship to have the Senate's Democrats and Republicans working on this, but this is something that, frankly, the president fought for months. He considered it an intrusion into his privilege here to negotiate what he called not a treaty, but a political agreement with a foreign country. But we had Democrats there, yourself included, voting 19-0 on this out of committee. Do you believe you've undermined your president on this issue?
No, No, not at all. In fact, I think America is stronger today as a result of the vote in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. We're on path to have much more unity between Congress and the White House. I think the president's in a stronger position now to deliver the type of diplomatic solution that prevents Iran from becoming a nuclear weapon state. That's our objective. It's a very simple objective. Iran cannot be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. And I think this week we're on path with a stronger position because we have a bipartisan support for how Congress should oversight that agreement, and the administration's in agreement. So it's not unusual to have any administration disagree as to what role Congress should play in any of the work that they're doing. But I think we've worked out the right way for a thoughtful review by Congress to look at sanctions, since we imposed the sanctions, as to how those sanctions will be handled.
I got to.
So, yeah, that's how Senator Ben Cardin, the ranking Democrat on the Foreign Relations Committee, answered the question as to whether he's undermining the president. And I'm going to show one more clip from him. This is Jim Sciutto asking him about the same issue. He was talking to the Republican Senator Bob Corker about the issue of whether sanctions should be released immediately or gradually. And you'll see that Ben Cardin kind of dodged that and pointed out that this vote isn't really on the merits of the deal because there is no deal yet. This is just the framework, and they're going to wait and see what's in the deal. And there are actually more details to this Corker-Cardin bill. Actually, the Congress can approve or disapprove the lifting of sanctions, and if they disapprove it, then President Obama can still veto it. So it would take, as long as he can get 34 senators to not override his veto, then Congress still has no authority to stop him from making this deal. But and Ben Cardin sort of alludes to that, but doesn't get to all of it over in this clip.
I got to tell you, Senator, one of the difficulties covering this nuclear agreement is that it seems like the tale of two agreements. After the political agreement a couple weeks ago, the Iranians talk about a certain agreement back home. U.S. officials talk about another one here, and they seem to be at loggerheads. And on one of those key issues, which Senator Corker talked about, and I know you have strong opinion about as well, and the president said he has strong opinions about, and that is how sanctions relief is done. Is it done immediately? Is it done phased in? And the president, frankly, did not give a straight answer on that on Friday. He seems to be allowing for a lot of wiggle room there. I have to ask you, same question I asked the Republican Senator Corker, will the Senate reject a deal that gives immediate sanctions relief as opposed to phased in sanctions relief on the sanctions that the Senate and Congress passed in recent years with regards to Iran's nuclear program?
Well, Bob Corker and I have worked very closely together to get the legislation that's moving through Congress to the president and signed. It is not a vote on the merits of an agreement. We don't know what's in that agreement until we see it in June. What's been agreed to on April 2nd was a framework. We need to see whether we accomplish our purpose. And our purpose is to have ample time before Iran could break out to a nuclear weapon, that we have full inspections so we can find out if they're cheating, because we don't trust Iran, and be able to take effective action to prevent Iran from becoming a nuclear weapon state.
Let me ask you this before.
So like I said, Senator Ben Cardin there kind of alluded to the fact that this isn't a vote on the merits of the deal and that there's still going to be a deal. But I don't think that entire exchange, the introduction from CNN State of the Union guest host Jim Sciutto, or any of the questions with Bob Corker, Senator Bob Corker and Senator Ben Cardin, really illuminated the fact that this deal gives a lot of power to President Obama still, since the Congress will have this vote to approve or disapprove the lifting of sanctions, and then Obama still has the power to veto that, and if he can get at least 34 senators to back up his veto, then he gets to make the deal. And I think over on Fox News Sunday, they made that a lot more clear in Chris Wallace's questioning of Senator Lindsey Graham. And he still seemed to think that there would be no senators who would vote for the deal if these specific changes weren't made in terms of anytime, anywhere inspections and getting rid of the hardened sites and no uranium enrichment program. and I'll talk about that a little more if you see it here.
Before you lift sanctions down the road. So I think the framework presented by President Obama is completely different in the eyes of the Iranians, and the Congress will look at this, will have a say, will vote before we lift congressional sanctions. And I don't think there's any chance we're going to lift congressional sanctions as long as you have hardened sites like Bordeaux still open.
Well, wait a minute, because you're talking about the Corker-Menendez bill, which passed the Senate Foreign Relations Committee unanimously. Looks like it's going to pass the House and the Senate, and that would say that Congress has 30 days after the deal is finally presented to approve it or disapprove it. You're saying there's no chance that? Well, I mean, let me ask you, because there's a flip side of it. It isn't that Congress has to approve it. What can happen is they can disapprove it, then the president vetoes it, and then all he needs is 34 votes, for instance, in the Senate to make his veto stand up. Are you saying that he's not going to have 34 votes in the Senate?
I'm saying if there's a final deal that doesn't require any time, anywhere inspections, that the Senate will not go along with that. I'm saying that if you keep hardened secret sites open, you're not going to get Senate approval. Nobody in the Senate, in a bipartisan fashion, trusts the Iranians. They lie, they cheat, they're a murderous regime. They've been trying to develop a nuclear weapon. The framework that I've been presented with has to be turned into a final deal, and there is no way we're going to approve a deal that doesn't allow for inspections anytime, anywhere, remove all the highly enriched uranium, and limit their nuclear enrichment program to something for one reactor that can never be used to make a bomb. I'm highly confident, given the Iranian behavior of turning the world upside down, that the framework, if it does become a final deal, is going to have a hard time getting through the Senate because it is so weak.
But just real quickly, because we're running out of time, it doesn't have to get through the Senate. It's the question as to whether or not the president's veto would stand up. Are you saying that you think the Senate would override his veto?
If the final agreement doesn't allow anytime, anywhere inspections, it has a large enrichment program. It keeps Bordeaux an underground secret site, reinforced site open, that he will get it will be rejected large enough to override a veto, because members of the Senate understand that this is the most consequential vote we will ever take, and the Iranians can't be trusted. They lie, they cheat, and this deal, in my view, would allow too many opportunities for them to break out. I'll wait and see how it looks on paper, but if you don't have anytime, anywhere inspections, forget about it. I just don't think any Democrat or Republican is going to agree to allow that to become binding.
So that's quite a bold prediction from Senator Lindsey Graham, given the number of senators. Like I said, all President Obama needs is 34 senators, and that's not even all the Democrats. And one of the most conservative Democrats, Joe Manchin, was over on CBS's Face the Nation, and he said that he thought the inspections were real inspections, and he sounded like he was kind of in favor of the deal over in this clip.
Talk a little bit about what's going on with this proposed deal with Iran. And, you know, the Supreme Leader there says that we can't do inspections on military bases there. Senator Rubio said he doesn't think this deal is going to go through. I'm beginning to agree with him. I think it's going to be very difficult to get it done under these conditions. What's your take here?
Bob, my take is that I'd simply rather negotiate for peace and use all our diplomacy than declare war.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you look at history where we are, 2003 they had 164 centrifuges. That time, President Bush's administration took a hardline stand. We wouldn't tolerate any. Fast forward to today, they got 19,000. Since they started talking about a year and a half ago, at least it stopped from progressing. So I don't make any bones about it. We don't trust Iran and they don't trust us. This is not about trust, it's about verifying.
Well, if you don't have inspections, real inspections, how can you really be sure?
I've been told from all secured meetings I've been in that we are having real inspections. They are in there, and they're seeing basically for the first time the EIA. They're able to be there. Those are the people with the expertise. And to have Mr. Moniz, as far as Ernie Moniz, our Secretary of Energy, with his expertise, you've got to believe some of the people that have that ability to evaluate. But just going back into cocoon and saying we don't trust and walk away from this, I don't think there's a senator that doesn't want to be involved in this process. I want to be. I've signed on to the Menendez-Kirk did not sign on to the Corker Menendez, but I signed Menendez-Kirk, which basically says, as of June the 30th, we will double down on sanctions if you don't have a deal. Let the people that are skilled at doing this do their job.
Excuse me for that delay. So yeah, that's the last clip on Iran I want to show you. It sounds like there is some real disagreement as to whether the Congress is going to authorize the deal with Iran if it doesn't include these anytime inspections and hardened target, getting rid of the hardened targets and most of the uranium enrichment. I don't know if this is all a bargaining tactic, but in a couple months when the final deal is announced and it gets before the Congress, I guess we'll find out. I have a couple more quick clips on a couple individual topics I want to show before I end tonight. First, there's this latest police officer shooting issue that came up this last week. This time it had to do with an auxiliary police officer, which is an issue I didn't know that much about, which is why I want to show you this clip. It's from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. It's their reporter Jim Avila talking about auxiliary police officers and this specific shooting, which involved basically a volunteer police officer, a sheriff in Oklahoma, or a reserve sheriff in Oklahoma, who mistakenly went for his gun instead of his taser, according to his explanation over in this clip.
In today's Closer Look, more police videos making headlines. The latest leading to praise for an Ohio officer who exercised restraint when confronted by a suspected killer. That incident ending without bloodshed. But after a reserve officer in Tulsa, Oklahoma killed a suspect when he mistakenly fired his gun instead of a taser, many are asking whether volunteer officers should be armed in the first place. ABC's Jim Avila has more.
In Tulsa, Oklahoma, where a full-time insurance executive and political donor to the sheriff volunteered as a reserve deputy, then mistakenly pulled his .357 Magnum instead of his taser and shot a fleeing suspect to death. It's difficult to tell the difference between the real cops and those backing them up as a hobby. That's what Tulsa Reserve Officer Robert Bates says on NBC's Today Show was his role as a reserve officer.
I do clean up when they're done. I take notes, I take photographs, and that's my job.
Bates, like the other reserves in Tulsa, carries a firearm on duty, explaining on national TV that he pulled the gun instead of his taser.
You must believe me, it can happen to anyone.
More than half the 18,000 police agencies nationwide use reserve officers. In New York City, they have 4,000 auxiliary police backing up 34,000 full-fledged officers. But there's one big difference between New York reserves and Tulsa's. In New York, reserves don't carry guns.
My own view is that the volunteers should not be armed. There is a difference in the training between auxiliary officers and regular police officers.
In Fairfax, Virginia, their 85 reserves carry tasers but not handguns. They do have access to shotguns in their cars. The reserves are trained by the same instructors as the full-time cops, but spend a lot less time at the academy because they have full-time jobs.
My name is Robert Mosley, software engineer by trade.
Fred Sanborn, and I'm an aerospace consultant.
I'm William Ridgway. I'm an IT specialist.
But on weekends and nights, these men staff DUI checkpoints, provide security at events like funerals and fairs, and back up their full-time partners.
Did you feel bad about not having a gun?
No, never.
There are no national standards for reserve police officers. Some carry no weapons, others carry tasers and mace, and as we learned so tragically this week in Tulsa, some are allowed to carry lethal handguns. For This Week, Jim Avila, ABC News.
So, like I said, I thought that was a good report from ABC's Jim Avila talking about auxiliary police officers. Even though I was involved in the criminal justice system as a public defender for quite a while, I never really ran into the issue of auxiliary police officers, and I didn't know that much about it. Just from watching that report, it seemed to me like they shouldn't really have guns, maybe not even tasers. but you can let me know what you think down in the video, down in the comment section. So now the final topic I want to get to, and the final clip for tonight's show, is on the topic of marijuana. You know, this show is being broadcast on April 19th, so tomorrow, Monday, is April 20th. I think some of my viewers in Europe, it may already be April 20th, which is, I guess, this stoner holiday here in the United States based on some long ago after school 4:20 p.m. meeting time, from what I understand, and now April 20th has become a marijuana holiday, and that was covered on HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher. But surprisingly, I'm not going to take a clip from Real Time with Bill Maher. Instead, I'm going to show you Chuck Todd on NBC's Meet the Press making a definite reference to 420, even a little wink you'll see when he talks about how marijuana will be getting more coverage tomorrow than on the other 364 days a year. You'll see the little wink, and he's actually giving an interesting analysis of how marijuana is split between Republicans and Democrats, even though I even made a video a while back about whether the Republican Party could steal the marijuana issue, because there's the libertarian wing and, you know, it's small government and all that. But as you can see, when Chuck Todd talks about this, I guess the actual Republican voters or Republican areas are the areas that just don't like marijuana legalization. And look for that 420 reference I mentioned over in this clip.
This Sunday, it's all about the fight over the legalization of marijuana and how the rules regarding those green plants are colored by the nation's red-blue divide. By the way, over the next 24 hours, expect to read a lot more about marijuana than the other 364 days a year. Anyway, currently 23 states and the District of Columbia have relaxed rules regarding the sale and consumption of marijuana. And of course, polls show that a majority of Americans support some form of legalizing the drug. But even in those states where it is legal, the marijuana rules at the local level are a bit more complicated and somewhat partisan. The most interesting example, of course, is the state of Colorado, one of the first ones to legalize recreational use. It is perhaps right now our best laboratory on the whole idea. In fact, take a look at this on the political side of things. Only 21 of the state's 64 counties actually allow retail marijuana shops. That's how the rule works. Counties can decide whether they want to do this. Well, others that haven't allowed it only allow medical marijuana dispensaries or completely have banned the sale altogether. Now, when you compare the map in Colorado that allow it to the 2012 presidential election results map, you won't be surprised that a clear pattern emerges. In fact, take a look at this. Of the 21 counties that allow recreational sales, 18 of them are blue counties. They voted for President Obama. So there's the political lay of the land. How about how the law has been implemented? As for the larger debate about the fear of an addiction plague, we searched, and on that front, the data's still not in yet. There's definitely some study going on. As for the economic impact, well, here's what we know. Receipts from taxes, licenses, and fees have been lower than the Colorado governor at the time predicted, at least so far. So then it leads to this question. Is it a novelty that will wear off, or is this simply an industry that is still trying to get going? One thing we do know, marijuana legalization is gaining momentum nationally, and we're likely to see this debate expand to more and more communities in 2016. Why? Some key swing states, including Ohio and Florida, are going to have marijuana in some form on the ballot.
So, yeah, that was an interesting analysis, and it looks like marijuana is going to continue to be a political issue, and at least according to that analysis, the Democratic Party is the pot party. But you can let me know what you think down in the comment section. I really have to finish up the show. I appreciate all of you who joined me live. I think I peaked out at around 110, 112 views, still over 90 of you still watching the show, and I've been reading your comments along the way. I find that to be some insightful comments, a lot of arguing amongst yourselves. But as I've mentioned the last couple shows, when I upload this onto my Patreon page, I will include the however many comments from the live show that seem to disappear when the live show becomes a recorded show on my YouTube page. So if you want to see the live comments, you can look over there. And I have 40 patrons on Patreon now, pledging me over $200 a month, which is over half my goal to keep the show going without having to worry about YouTube revenue. So I will put some ads in, but probably only like every 20 minutes or so. And I will be continuing to do this show every Sunday at 6:30 p.m. Pacific for the foreseeable future. So join me next Sunday. And I skipped excerpting parts of the video the last couple weeks. I may do that this week. I may finally get another edited, produced video up. I'm not sure. There have been a lot of demands from the real world in the last week, so not a lot of YouTube time, but I'll see what I can do, and I guess until I put up that next video or broadcast my show next Sunday, I will be seeing you all around the internet.